Welcome to the New Mom Talk podcast, your go-to podcast for evidence-based answers to your burning questions about parenting. Join us as we dive into commonly Googled topics and hear from experts and real moms. Let's navigate parenthood together, one question at a time. Hi, everyone. Today we're going to talk about postpartum incontinence survey. So we have Elise Fossnight that's going to walk us through what this is, what it means, how it impacts us as moms, because we know it can. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to you, Elise, if you can start off with telling us a little bit about yourself and what you do.
Yep, absolutely. Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me, and just really excited to talk about the postpartum incontinence survey that Aeroflow Urology crafted and put out there. Unfortunately, postpartum incontinence is pretty common, but I think doing a survey was really key in having those numbers down. But a little background on me is I'm a urology PA. I've been a urology PA for 14 years. And I do a lot with pelvic health and a lot with sexual medicine. And I actually opened up my own private practice about 5 years ago in Asheville, North Carolina, which is actually where Aeroflow Urology, their headquarters are. So it's really exciting to be very close to them. But opened up the private practice to raise more awareness about pelvic health, talking again about incontinence and sexual health concerns as well.
I love that because I always say this. I feel like a lot of us don't know what pelvic floor means or what it is until you have your baby. And then you're like, I didn't know that there's such a thing or what a pelvic floor was, or all of the things, even though you're pregnant and it impacts you and you feel all this pressure on your pelvic floor, but nobody talks to you about it during pregnancy.
Exactly. I do. I think we take for granted our pelvic floor, right? We don't think about urinating and having bowel movements or the sexual function to our pelvic floor until, like you said, it's like in our face when we should have been having these conversations well ahead of time.
Yeah, so this is going to lead me to my first question. Let's start off with the basics. What is postpartum incontinence and why does this happen after childbirth?
So postpartum incontinence is the incontinence that happens that is you're not necessarily aware of. So meaning that you can have some leaking of urine with coughing, sneezing, exercise. There can also be some urinary incontinence that's associated with urgency. So you feel like you have to go to the bathroom and you rush to go to the bathroom and you're leaking on your way. So how this mechanism actually occurs, if just being pregnant puts a lot of extra pressure on that pelvic floor, right? When we think about how we stand, gravity and all that uterus, how it's expanding and all of the amniotic fluid and the weight of the baby and all of those changes that are occurring, that's actually going to be all of this extra pressure on your pelvic floor and those pelvic organs that are there too. And so what is essentially happening too, as your body is getting closer to delivery, the preferred way for that baby to come out is through a vaginal delivery. So your body is making those changes and having extra elasticity in those ligaments and joints in preparation for baby to pass through birth canal. And so that means that pelvic floor is actually expanding 200%, right? Whether you actually have a vaginal delivery or not. So huge. And so if you end up having a vaginal delivery, there is some extra pressure as that's happening with expanding of those pelvic floor muscles, having accommodation for baby to come out. And so it's the expansion of those pelvic floor muscles that are causing weakness around the urethra to be able to hold that urine. So while it is super common to have urinary incontinence afterwards, pretty much immediately, because those muscles have to go back, right? If they've expanded 200% over the last trimester and even beforehand, those muscles, it takes time for that to go back. Now, the question I always get is, but I had a C-section, Elise. How does that contribute to my incontinence, right? Your body was still preparing for a vaginal delivery. That baby didn't come out that way, but you cut through healthcare provider cut through all of those lovely muscles, right? And your core to get baby out. And your core is such an important part to your pelvic floor muscles also. So those muscles have to heal. And a lot of times that alone, again, can cause some weakness or even just some dysfunction, right? That your muscles aren't contracting or trying to pull in to support that bladder. And so you're going to have a dribble or a leakage that's going to happen with that. And again, it just takes time for that. So again, super common, at least for those first 6 weeks postpartum as your body is starting to heal. But again, in terms of the healing process, it's going to take you a lot longer than that. It took you 9 months to make a baby. I always tell people, you'll give your body grace and patience. And sometimes it can take up to a year for those muscles to get healed and contracted and back into those more neutral spaces.
I love everything that you just mentioned, especially the C-section part, because it is so true that you really don't think about like, oh, well, I had a C-section, so my pelvic floor should be totally fine. But let's talk about how common it is. How common is postpartum incontinence, and are certain mothers more at risk than others? Or how can you even figure out if you are more likely to have it?
Yep, exactly. So let's start with that one because I think it's important to understand your bladder function before you got pregnant or before you had your baby. And so thinking about, did you have some weakness in your pelvic floor ahead of time, or did you engage in activities where maybe your pelvic floor wasn't as neutral as we would like to be? I use the word neutral for a lot of pelvic floor descriptions because oftentimes we equate, or there's terminology as in tight pelvic floor where we want strong, but you need a neutral pelvic floor to be strong, to engage in being able to support those pelvic floor muscles. Tightness tends to happen with a lot of athletes. So people who are runners, gymnasts, again, more of those high athlete individuals, could be cyclists that we see this. So a tight pelvic floor muscle is actually not going to be a strong pelvic floor muscle, and there's going to be some weakness that is involved in that. So some of those things actually could be, I think, pieced out or screened out if we would talk about it even before somebody got pregnant. How awesome would it be for it to be super common for your healthcare provider to refer you to a pelvic floor therapist ahead of time to say, let's just see where you're at, right? So you could anticipate. And that's kind of, I didn't realize that I had some weakness in my pelvic floor before I actually had kids. And retrospectively, I'm like, well, shoot, I wish I would have actually gone to see my pelvic floor therapist beforehand. So I think that just raising awareness and having education about what is a pelvic floor is going to be super key, so that then you might be able to isolate some of those risk factors ahead of time. The other thing in terms of how common is it, I mean, up to 85% of postpartum mamas are going to experience some degree of urinary incontinence within those first 6 weeks. That's a lot. And then when you think about around 60%, around two thirds will have continued potential varying urinary incontinence even up to 6 months postpartum. So it's a lot. So again, super, super common. But again, we're not training our mamas after this is to start engaging in those pelvic floor muscles right away. We got to start turning them on and getting them activated again so that we can get back to those neutral spaces. Again, they expanded over that 200%. We want to be able to get them back to that 100% as much as we can.
What are some of the biggest misconceptions about postpartum incontinence?
Yep, that it's normal. And it drives me bananas, right? The normal quotes is crazy. So I always tell people, right, just because something is common does not mean it is normal. And when you think about other cultures and other countries that are out there, here in the United States, we do a really poor job of supporting our women in that postpartum time frame. We expect them to go back to, work right away, get back to the same activities right away, but, with no help or no guidance. And I was very lucky during my PA training is to actually go to the University of Wolverhampton, which is over in England, and study with a urogynecologist. And it is standard of care over there for whether you had a vaginal delivery or cesarean to go see a pelvic floor therapist right away, because they're trying to help you, again, strengthen that. Just as if you were going to go in for shoulder surgery, right? You would go to prehab, you go to see your physical therapist, you'd have your surgery, and then you go to, rehab afterwards. It's the same principle. We're still using muscles. Just because people have been birthing babies for thousands of years doesn't mean that we don't know better now, so we should do better.
Hi, everyone. It's your host, Mariella. I want to thank you for listening and share some ways to show your continued support. You can rate and review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Share the show with friends and family. Buy me a coffee to help with the financial costs of running a podcast. Follow me on Instagram at newmomtalk.podcast. And finally, subscribe to my newsletter. Thank you for listening. Yeah, so true. I love that you mentioned that because I feel like we're always like, oh yeah, it's common, it's okay. And we have this expectation that as moms, you're just supposed to bounce back, right?
Yes.
And we don't really talk too much about all of the changes that your body is going through during that recovery stage, that your mind is going through, the mental health. And now you've got a human, if it's your first one, that you need to figure out, oh, and you don't have any sleep.
Oh my goodness. Well,
Figure it
and
out.
now, yes. And now what some medical research is coming out is, right, these shift in hormones and how that is really impacting your pelvic floor muscles and how utilizing some local estrogen therapy and estrogen cream can actually help to repair and help heal those tissues. So again, it's just, we should do better.
Yeah.
So I
Well,
know a lot
even
of things
just with
need to change.
just like postpartum visits, you get 1 to 2 visits depending on your form of delivery, and then that's it. Like when I went back, I had a C-section, and when I went back to working out, like nobody told me, even though I have a lot of different certifications in Pilates and yoga and whatnot, nobody told me, oh, you need to like work on your core before you start running. I just figured that out from, of all places, the Peloton app. So it's crazy.
Yeah, it really is. Letting women just kind of figure this out on their own is you're so lost and you don't know where to turn to. And unfortunately, there's a lot of misinformation that is scattered. We have social media and the internet, which is great. And we have some really good sources out there. But sometimes, again, from a situation standpoint, not everybody has access to that or time for those sorts of things or the financial means to be able to have a Peloton or to get a pelvic floor therapist or to do the research or even have the time to sit there to do those exercises or incorporate those core strengthening exercises as well.
I would love to go ahead and jump into steps that new moms can take to manage or improve their postpartum incontinence, especially, given all of the factors that you just mentioned or possible limitations that moms might have.
Yeah, absolutely. So being prepared right ahead of time, I think as much as you can. Again, it sounds easier said than done, but going, okay, I know my body is going to go through this massive change and that I need to give grace and patience. So who's on your team is not what I was like. Again, you can't do this alone. It's not a siloed with this. So we definitely want to make sure that who's on your team, who's your support person. And I think that this is where your partner can come into play a lot to help out in terms of holding the baby. I know that if you decide to, breastfeed, to lactate, whatever that looks like for you, there's still a lot of things that partner can do. This is what we did for my husband. I would feed baby, and as soon as I was done, you get the kids. You can hold them, you can love on them, you can change their diaper, you can give them a bath, and I can work on scheduling some time for myself and putting in even little bits. I think a lot of times we have to think we have to do everything in half an hour, but I really find that it's key if you just do it in tiny increments. So 10 minutes, 3 times a day can be an easy way to start to engage in those pelvic floor exercises and thinking about doing it gradual. So doing it really slow, laying on the floor can be great, right? Take gravity away from you. So doing some hip bridges, just engaging those pelvic floor muscles, sitting on one of those exercise balls, even with your baby, right? And bouncing. That's going to start to engage your core. Standing exercises can be helpful once you get to that point also where your pelvic floor is starting to come back again to those neutral spaces. Can be great. I really try to avoid crunches, is what I tell a lot of people, that that increases pressure to the abdominals and extra pressure on this pelvic floor. But in terms of getting like a pelvic floor therapist, I know having to travel to see a pelvic floor therapist can be difficult. There are some pelvic PTs out there or OTs that can come to your house to help you out. Some insurance companies will cover those costs. So finding that out ahead of time can be helpful, and planning that. Okay, if my insurance isn't going to cover this, can I afford 3 visits with my pelvic PT and at least get 3 visits in to start this process? There's lots of apps out there. There's lots of YouTube channels that you can do to do nice and slow, gradual processes. And this is the biggest thing too, is patience, right? Giving yourself grace and time for your body to recover is going to be so important. And you might have some setbacks, and that's okay. And talking to your healthcare provider also is going to be key to say, this is not feeling right. I'm having pain. I'm having dryness. I'm having incontinence. I know that this is common, but it's not normal. And what are my options? Not asking, is this okay that I'm having this? Because that lets that provider say, yeah, this is normal. This is common. You're just going to have to deal with it, right? Ask for what you need, right? Don't be gaslit. Leave without having something, a reference or a referral to somebody else that can help you.
Yeah. I love the fact that you just mentioned also just checking your insurance
Mhm.
before you even have baby. I always say this, like have a list of all of the possible providers you might need after you have baby. Lactation consultant, pelvic floor PT. Obviously, you need your pediatrician before you leave the hospital if you're delivering at the hospital. So,
Meal delivery services, like make your life simple as you can beforehand. Yes.
yeah, and if you're trying to figure out what your insurance covers after you have baby, it's just so stressful and so overwhelming. And sometimes
Mm,
navigating the websites are not easy. So,
no, not at all.
when should a mom seek professional help for incontinence and what treatments are available to them?
If incontinence is lasting longer than just like a couple days, like if you feel like it's just a one off because you weren't able to squeeze your pelvic floor muscles when you had a big sneeze, or it had been like 2 hours since you had gone to the bathroom, so your bladder was already kind of full and you sneezed or you did some exercise, like that's okay if it's a one off or whatever else. But if it's consistent and it's happening and it's bothersome, if you start to notice like, I don't want to go out and do things with my friends because I don't know where the bathroom is going to be. Like those are key things to seek assistance. You could seek your OBGYN. You could also seek a urogynecologist. You could seek out a urologist. You could actually call the pelvic floor therapy places. Just call them, right? And just say, hey, I don't know what to do. I need assistance. So my first option for people when they have incontinence is we start thinking about, tell me what's going on in the mechanism. Again, are you sneezing and you're leaking, coughing, or is this urgency? Like you're having to rush to go to the bathroom and you're leaking on the way. So trying to figure out whether that's stress urinary incontinence or urge urinary incontinence, or even mixed, because you can have both of those. Either way, you're going to get a referral to a pelvic floor therapist from me. That's number one. Starting out conservative as much as you can is going to be great. And the majority of the time, urinary incontinence episodes can be greatly improved just with pelvic PT alone. If that is not fully helping, you can do a pessary. A pessary is a ring that kind of looks like a little dish that is silicone, a medical grade silicone that has a firm ring in it. So it gets inserted into the vagina like a tampon and actually folds out to help support the bladder and the urethra. Some of these have little knobs on there. So if that's the case, a pessary can be a great option, at least to kind of as your body's healing. And once you're able to insert something into the vagina, that's a great option for you. Surgery is kind of the last thing that I would really recommend, or any kind of urethral bulking agents, especially if you know that you're gonna have more kiddos. Then I would wait for those sorts of things and doing something that is going to be more conservative. Sometimes just knowing that you are protected with having a good pad or some good like brief, urinary incontinence underwear can be really helpful too. There's lots of brands that are out there, and Aeroflow Urology is also a great one to reach out to. Also, they're going to be kind of a team player for you, and being able to call your insurance company or to reach out to see what your benefits are, to see if incontinence products are covered. And if they're not, sometimes they're able to give you some free products, even just to get you by in the meantime. So you've got definitely a lot of resources. And again, the majority of the time too, that as you start getting closer to that year, of being postpartum, your body should start to heal a little bit more and the incontinence will get less and less. But there are going to be some of those other individuals where that's going to be a little bit more prolonged and they just need a little bit of extra assistance. The other thing that people forget is avoid constipation. Like, you don't think about those sorts of things, but that's extra pressure in the pelvic floor. And so avoiding constipation, getting lots of fiber, drinking lots of water is going to be really helpful there too.
Finally, my last question. Do you have any other tips, suggestions, and or recommendations for anyone that maybe is trying to figure out what they need to do, or if they fit into this category or wants to take the survey?
Yeah, absolutely. So find your posse is what I always tell people too. Like, find your group, find your community. There's lots of people out there. You're not alone. Again, this is a very, very common occurrence and should not just be poo-poo to the side that there's nothing that you can't do about it. So take action, advocate for yourself, find people, that will listen, and keep searching for resources as much as you can. I don't have any ties to it, but Origin, ORIGIN, is an online pelvic floor organization. And so they also take insurance. So we have accessibility in terms of virtual options nowadays. That's a great way to at least talk to somebody. And then making appointments, I think, with healthcare providers is going to be a great option as well. And then talk about it. I think there's a lot of stigma and embarrassment and shame that goes around incontinence or pelvic health. But again, it's so common, and to talk about it, that will make other people go, that's happening to me too. I want to talk about it. And the more awareness and the more education that we bring to a topic, the more light you're going to shine on it for people to listen, to validate, to offer different services and resources for you. And if you wanted to fill out the survey, you can go to aeroflowurology.com.
And I'll have all of that linked in the show notes, as well as all of your information. So anyone that wants to reach out, anyone that's interested in taking the survey, you can find that in the show notes. Thank you so much for taking time out of your day. I did also want to add, for moms, if you look into any mom groups and see, usually they work with local resources such as pelvic floor PTs that are wanting to educate moms. So just look into that, because a lot of those times those classes are free. And you meet other moms that are going through what you're going through, and moms that have babies your age.
Exactly. Yeah. Facebook is a great for those groups and those mom groups out there too.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Thank you so much. I so appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you again so much for having me. And
thank you for listening. Tune in next week for our next episode. You can find us on Instagram for more updates and tips. Be sure to subscribe wherever you listen to your podcasts, and give us a review if you like us.